Hi, I'm glad you're here. I want to talk uh, about Chapter 5 on workforce diversity and bias. Uh, the chapter talks a little bit about workforce diversity and inclusion. I want to really focus in on that. The text discusses, and it does a pretty good job discussing barriers to diversity and inclusion. I like that Thomas's definition of privilege, the luxury to ignore aspects of one's identity that confer unearned advantages and power. Certainly, I mean, that's an issue. And then what's described as barriers to work. Um, Barriers to work in the text, once again, there's a section on barriers to work for women. For example, Sheryl Sandberg, in her new book, Lean In, she talks about barriers to work for women and also the how cultural expectations based upon gender roles have affected the behavior of women as well as those discriminating against women. And thus her title of her book, Lean In, that she's saying that women also have to act in their own interests and not fulfill cultural expectations related to gender when they're in a leadership role. They need to act like leaders. There's also barriers to work for persons of color, and I want to get into that in particular about the implicit bias, and certainly racism is still an issue in work environments today. And then barriers to work for sexual minorities. Recently, for the first time, polls are showing that the majority of Americans are now open to sexual identity. I think the millennial generation is going to lead the way on that. Um, Also, I would add, and it's not included in the text, um, ageism or barriers to work for those over 50. It's definitely a trend now. When people hit 50, organizations right away they are looking to replace them with younger, less expensive workers. And so for some people, once they hit 50, and if they become unemployed over 50, it really becomes difficult. I know I mentioned in class that a couple of years ago I was at the conference for the Association for Change Management Professionals, and the consultants there were seeing so much of this, they were using the word ageism to describe it. Um, Also, I want to talk some about the confusion related to melting pot theory, and confusion is mostly with older generations. For example, the millennials are not confused about it, but older generations are. So I'll get into that. In order to explain this melting pot theory, I have to start with a little bit of immigration history, and it goes back to the 1800s, and the U.S. had what was called an open policy. And the focus at that time basically was on character, and there were some ethnic groups, for example, Chinese, were discriminated against. But when I'm saying character is the United States did not want immigrants of questionable character, like convicts, and so they wanted people with integrity. And then they came out with the national origins quota system in 1921, and this heavily favored European immigrants. And this was mainstream melting pot theory in 1921. So when immigrants came here to the United States, the expectation, they were expected to assimilate. And what I mean by that is they were expected to adopt the culture of the majority of people already here and dissociate from their originating culture, and many of them did. Uh, so that went on for quite some time. Um, National quotas were eliminated in 1965, and then the national focus actually shifted to illegal immigrants. Um, Now, legal immigrants from Mexico established an Hispanic culture here in the United States, and which is thriving today. And they represented the beginning of a large number of immigrants that arrived from outside of Europe. And what they discovered, as well as any other immigrants from outside of Europe, that melting pot theory was not working because they could not easily assimilate into the majority theory that already existed. So this was a problem for immigrants, and as a reason, with this being a problem, the United States as a country, we shifted away from the melting pot theory and to cultural pluralism. Now, just to give you a definition, the peaceful, says more or less coexistence of multiple subcultures within a given society. So what this really means is that immigrants can come here and they decide how much assimilating they want to do. And they keep as much of the identity of their culture as they choose to keep, and it's their choice. And as Americans, we honor those differences. Now, a lot of cities, as a matter of fact, probably more cities than not today, are very diverse, culturally diverse. Just for example, right here I'm in the Detroit area. We have the largest Middle Eastern population outside of the Middle East, and there's multiple countries represented in that. We also have Hispanic, Asian. We have a lot of Vietnamese and Koreans. Certainly, a lot of European immigrants. This is a very culturally diverse area. Just for example, my neighborhood that I live in, I think has all of these cultures. My neighbor across the street is from Sri Lanka. I have neighbors the other way across from me are Jewish. I also have Islamic, Middle Eastern neighbors. I have African Americans. So there's and different people with European backgrounds from different countries there. So it's very, very diverse. And this is becoming more of the norm. Now, the confusion here is with some older generations, when they went to school as children, were taught the melting pot theory. So they don't understand cultural pluralism. They think people should come here and fully assimilate the way they did or their family did. And that's just not the case. It's no longer an expectation. Now, once again, once you hit the millennial generation, they get it because they grew up being taught cultural pluralism, so they embrace it, and they also embrace sexual diversity as well. Just some metaphors today that illustrate the pluralism of culture here. Jesse Jackson used the term rainbow coalition, and that's what it means. It's a multicultural organization. David Dinkins from New York City used the word mosaic to describe New York City, which is very culturally diverse. Shirley Chisholm's definition or metaphor for the salad bowl has been very popular. That's probably the most popular of all these. Barbara Jordan used the metaphor of kaleidoscope. So all of these are metaphors showing we've moved on to a different theory in terms of what we're doing here. Now, what did I went back to? Let me see if I can bring up the right one. There we go. So the confusion melting pot overstates assimilation and implies an American stereotype. And this stereotype does not work for all immigrants, so that's why this theory was officially abandoned. Now the problem with pluralism, it understates assimilation, implying there's no change. And that's not true, because every group that comes to the United States assimilates to some degree. It's their choice today. So American pluralism in practice allows the individual to choose how much assimilation they're going to do. And we see in the news, periodically, we see in the news stories from countries, say for example like France, that are still embracing melting pot theory. If you move to France, you're expected to assimilate into the majority culture that's there. And one example of that was Middle Eastern immigrants to France, where they were passing a law actually to force them to dress the same way as the mainstream French and not wear their traditional Middle Eastern garbs. Okay, I have in the class have the article by Mary Rowe posted on micro inequities. I really like this theory. I think that it is so true and helpful when people learn it. The text, the definition, implicit or unconscious bias. I think Mary Rowe's term for that is micro inequity, and I think that's a good term. Subtle issues that exclude or make a person feel excluded. For example, it could be as simple as their name's left off an email list, or inequities in job assignments, emails that make fun of diversity. There's really a lot of ways this can be done subtly. My son is a doctoral student here at Capella, and we consult together. And a few years ago, I was teaching him this theory, and it was towards the end of the year, and we were traveling to Indiana to spend the Christmas holiday with my wife's mother and her stepfather, and we didn't want to disrupt their routine, so we said, look, whatever you normally do, we'll just join in. And they regularly go to church, so they said Christmas Eve was important for them to go to church. And we said, that's great, we would love to go to church with you. So, and as it turns out, that their church, I guess, had some political turmoil that had resulted in the pastor being fired and a new pastor having been hired. And they seemed to be fond of the new person who was hired. So when we got there, when we arrived to the church, my mother-in-law introduced me to one of the elders of the church, and he was a very polite elderly man, and he welcomed me to the church and did everything you might expect. And then following that, I had a chance to meet the new pastor. And the same thing, he was very cordial and welcomed me to the church. So I felt it was a warm welcome. And then we went in, and this being Christmas Eve, it wasn't all that crowded, I guess. There was 3 sections in the main body of the church, and so the section to the left was empty. The section to the right was fairly full. We sat towards the back of the middle section. Well, the podium that the pastor did the lecture from, or the sermon from, was just between the left section and the middle section. So when he came in, he set up, he's standing at the podium, and he's looking towards the front of the right section. And his gaze never varied from that. And finally, I'm starting to realize he's never making contact with the middle section. And so I elbowed my son and said, "What do you notice?" And my son right away says, "Well," he said, "for some reason he's not making any contact with any of us in the middle section." And then we could see, well, who he was actually making contact with was the elder of the church, who was probably the person instrumental in hiring him. And so what this became was a micro inequity for everyone in the middle section. They felt as if they were not important or left out. And so my son actually had a chance to experience this after we had been talking about it. The one thing I like the best about this theory is that, the text, and if I go back here for a second here, to the definition in the text, talks about implicit or unconscious bias, meaning that it's not intentional. So once you've heard this theory, I think that it brings it into your awareness, and a person who is mindful can manage this so that they're not delivering micro inequities to people. Now, just to give you an example, when I was being certified as a mediator in the state of Michigan, the last step for me was to mediate a mock conflict at the dispute center. So I went to the dispute center, I met the people, and I mediated this mock dispute. And at the end, when we were debriefing, the disputants revealed that they were actually trained mediators and with a lot of experience. And one of them was an attorney, and he had had his hands under the table, and I could tell he was doing something, but periodically, but I really couldn't tell what. And I didn't, and it wasn't a distraction to the mediation, so I didn't call him out on it. Well, it turns out what he was doing, he had a stopwatch, and he was literally timing how much time I made eye contact with each disputant. And as it turns out, I was okay. I was about 50-50. And anyway, he went on to make his point. And his point was, I have to be mindful about that and manage it, because he said if you make more eye contact with one disputant than another, you're delivering a micro inequity, and the person on the short end is likely not to agree, and the mediation is likely to end in non-agreement. And the reason being is that they didn't trust you, because they either consciously or unconsciously picked up that you were more focused on the other disputant. And I realized how important a micro inequity could be with that story. And so it's the same thing in organizations. Micro inequities can really make a difference to how a person feels about their experience in an organization and their level of commitment to the organization. So it's a very good theory and a good article to read that's been posted in the classroom. I've got the references for everything listed here. So once again, I'll post this in the class. Thank you.